Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending our virtual town hall on climate change and the increasing danger that wildfires pose in California. My name is Frank Pine. I'm the executive editor of the Southern California News Group. We're very proud to bring you this presentation today in partnership with the Center for Social Innovation at University of California, Riverside. For as long as I've been involved in local journalism, California's fire seasons have been getting steadily worse, more destructive and more dangerous. The first big wildfire I remember was in 2003. The old fire and the Grand Prix fire in the Inland Empire, which were just incredible at that time. And the wildfires we're seeing today are so much larger and so much more destructive. Last year, wildfires scorched more than 4 million acres, the most in modern times, including 5 of the state's 20 largest wildfires ever. A Stanford study found that last fall's fires caused 1,200 excess deaths and 4,800 extra emergency room visits in California, mostly among people 65 and older and people with pre-existing conditions such as respiratory problems, diabetes, and heart disease. There's no doubt that every year, wildfires are getting bigger and more dangerous. Wildfire seasons are starting earlier and lasting longer. It's an imminent threat to all of us who live here in the Golden State. We undertook this discussion today to talk about wildfires and the underlying climate-related issues. We have a presentation from State Secretary of National Resources and a panel discussion to follow where we will engage the issues more deeply. Interestingly, as we're having this conversation, Governor Gavin Newsom is in Fresno giving a press conference that started just a few minutes ago where he's announcing a more than $500 million plan to boost forest health, improve defensible space, and protect homes against wildfires, also while investing in fire prevention grants and prevention workforce training. Our timing is either really good or really bad, depending on how you view the counter-programming. Again, our presentation today is part of the SoCal Policy Forum, a series of, live events prior to the pandemic, more recently, virtual events. This is a partnership between the Southern California News Group and the Center for Social Innovation. It's now my pleasure to introduce the founding director of the Center for Social Innovation, Karthik Ramakrishnan. Karthik? Great,
thank you, Frank. Yeah, I'd like to think that we were prescient in deciding that this was going to be the topic. It is so important, and we might not be in the midst of wildfire season right now, but this is such a critical issue, especially as it involves climate change and our ability to be prepared, but also be resilient in the face of disasters such as these. The SoCal Policy Forum is something that's been a strategic partnership between the Center for Social Innovation and the Southern California News Group. CSI does work not only the Inland Empire region of Southern California, but more generally to contribute to an inclusive and equitable future for the future of Southern California and the state more generally. Today, we have a treat in terms of being able to really dig deep and to hear from a variety of perspectives, including from Secretary Wade Crowfoot. So I'm just going to read a little bit about the Secretary, and then we will stream his remarks. So Wade Crowfoot was appointed California's Natural Resources Secretary by Governor Gavin Newsom in January 2019. He oversees an agency of 19,000 employees who protect and manage California's natural resources. This includes the state's forests and natural lands, rivers and waterways, coasts and ocean, fish and wildlife, and energy development. He advises the governor on natural resources as well as environmental issues. Secretary Crowfoot believes good natural resource management helps natural places thrive and allows communities and our economy to prosper. His key priorities include building California's resistance to climate change-driven threats, including wildfire, which is the topic today, but also drought, flooding, and sea level rise. So over to the team to queue up Secretary Crowfoot's remarks.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me to share thoughts today. My name is Wade Crowfoot, and I serve as our California Natural Resources Secretary. And within our agency, we have CAL FIRE, of course, point of the spear on all things wildfire, as well as our Department of Water Resources and Department of Fish and Wildlife and state parks, our conservancies, our coastal commission. So much of what we do at the Natural Resources Agency is all about protecting people and nature from the impacts of climate change. And so today I know we're focusing on building our wildfire resilience as we face longer and more severe wildfire seasons. And I'm really pleased to be kicking this off and frankly honored to precede Senator Portentino, Dr. Goldner, Ms. Hernandez for this, what will be a great panel. I'm actually recording this message several hours early because I've been asked to join Governor Newsom today in the foothills of the Central Valley, talking about this very issue and sharing more about how we're partnering with the legislature to surge resources to build our wildfire resilience in advance of this fire season, and all that we're doing to ensure that we're taking a holistic approach to addressing catastrophic wildfires. Now let's start at the top, which is we in California know that we're facing more challenging wildfire conditions. The science tells us that our climate is changing, and specifically in California, our winters are becoming warmer and our summers are becoming hotter. And that compounds the wildfire cycle that we have as part of our natural ecology in California. Wildfire is part of our natural systems and has occurred since time immemorial. However, factors have converged to create increasingly dangerous wildfire conditions. One of those factors is what we call almost a century of a policy of wildfire exclusion, which means as our population grew into more rural areas, the policy for so long was to stop all wildfires and to minimize our management of our forests. And as a result, we have unnaturally dense landscapes, not only in our forests, but across our landscapes, be it wood oaklands or chaparral in California. So we have a changing landscape over the last century. And then converging with that is, as I mentioned, these warming winter and summer temperatures. The warmer winters mean drier conditions in our forests and across our landscapes, creating those conditions for wildfires to run hotter and faster. And then, of course, very hot summer temperatures that create conditions, obviously, that spreads fire faster. Now, here are some remarkable facts. 17 of the largest 20 wildfires in California's history have occurred in the last 20 years. 5 of the 6 largest wildfires in our state's history were burning last summer at the same time. So this we know, which is our wildfire cycles are becoming larger and more dangerous. In response, or in anticipation, our legislature and Governor Newsom and before him Governor Brown have expanded capacity to CAL FIRE to respond to these wildfires. Now, I am very proud of CAL FIRE and the men and women on the front lines battling our wildfires that every wildfire season demonstrate remarkable heroism. And I think it's accurate to say we have in California the world's largest and most sophisticated wildland firefighting force. And our governor, our legislature continue to help CAL FIRE build its capacity, getting more people on the front lines battling these wildfires, bringing more technology, including planes and helicopters, remote imaging to the response against wildfires. And as a result, even last summer, when we lost almost 5 million acres across California to wildfire, our casualties were fairly limited given the size of those fires. And that is a directly attributable to CAL FIRE, our local partners providing mutual aid, and of course, our partners at the U.S. Forest Service. But let's be clear, we cannot respond our way out of this crisis. So while we continue to build capacity of CAL FIRE and our response agencies, we need to do more proactively upfront to protect our communities and our natural places from wildfires. We call that wildfire resilience, allowing our state to continue to thrive within these wildfire conditions. This past January, Governor Newsom proposed what is a historic investment in wildfire resilience. upwards of $1 billion he proposed to the legislature to consider for this coming budget year, all focused on resilience activities. That represents an over 10-fold increase in the amount that the state would invest in these upfront activities compared to recent years. And I'm really excited that our legislative leadership has embraced this approach, and the governor's proposal is well aligned with their own vision of making a major quantum leap in investment on wildfire resilience. So as we hold this discussion here today, our legislature is working through the governor's budget proposal, and here in coming weeks and ultimately by June, we'll make a decision on just how much money to invest in wildfire resilience. Now, what does this mean, and what would this $1 billion be spent on? What's the basis for this proposal? Over the last 2 years, the governor has convened a task force that has historically been called the Forest Management Task Force. And that group involved federal, state, local agencies and stakeholders like counties and cities and local fire safe councils and resource conservation agencies, all to identify what are all the actions that we need to take to build our resilience to these catastrophic wildfires. And all of that work over the last 2 years culminated into an action plan that the governor released with his budget proposal in January. And it's called the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan. And it's a very clear, readable document that identifies specific actions that our state agencies will take to build this wildfire resilience. So the idea is, while the governor proposed $1 billion, it's based on the actions within this action plans that were developed over the last 2 years. And here are the activities that we propose to expand. The way I'll describe them is really in 3 concentric circles. First of all, state needs to support communities in building their wildfire resilience through expanded funding for home hardening, that is, making certain modifications to your home, such as screens on chimneys, to reduce ember-driven fires. It includes more funding for defensible space programs that reduce the vegetation around homes to protect those homes when wildfire comes. It includes more funding to cities to develop evacuation plans or places of refuge or hardening infrastructure to really ensure that these communities can actually weather wildfires that they might experience. And those resilience investments within communities are the inner concentric circle. Then the action plan and the budget calls for spending around communities, specifically emergency fuel breaks in places like suburban Southern California in the wildland urban interface, and smaller communities in Paradise, California in Butte County. That was, of course, subject to that horrific Camp Fire just a couple of years ago. The focus being working with CAL FIRE and local partners, prioritize emergency fuel breaks where we can manage vegetation around neighborhoods or communities so that if there are wildfires that bear down on communities, those wildfires stop or sometimes slow to be able to give the first responders an opportunity to defend the communities. The governor expedited 35 projects in his first year in office to build and protect these 200 communities. And those projects developed fuel breaks on about 90,000 acres of land. And he actually waived certain environmental review requirements so that those projects could be put in place very quickly. And what we saw last wildfire season is those emergency fuel breaks, in many occasions, were actually very helpful in protecting a community from an actual wildfire that bared down. So we have investments in communities, around communities, and then broader landscape level investments. So in places that are forested, this means actually more safe prescribed fire burning based on tribal practices that have been exercised for thousands of years. The idea is introducing low-level fire that reduces the so-called ladder fuels. So you don't torch the forest, but you actually clear out the understory so that when fire comes, it's more controllable. In addition to that prescribed fire, this also means ecologically based vegetation management or thinning forests in certain circumstances. In Southern California, where there's chaparral environment or oak woodlands environment, there are different types of vegetation treatments. It really needs to be managed differently than in the northern part of the state. But there can still be landscape level projects to allow fire to come, but reduce the potential of that fire from being catastrophic. So again, concentric circles within, around communities, and then broad landscapes. Now, one principle that we've really learned from so many leaders in the legislature that really is a bedrock foundation of our action plan is the importance of allowing for regionalized approaches and regionalized priorities. Building wildfire resilience is not a one-size-fits-all solution from Sacramento. What suburban Southern California requires by way of resilience investments is very different than what the north coast of our state requires or what the Sierra Nevada requires. And so rather than prescribe funding or actions across the state in a uniform way, our proposed budget is focused on actually enabling regional leaders, that is counties, cities, resource conservation districts, fire safe councils, to come together on a regional basis and identify what are the priority uses of funding. And then this $1 billion+ that the governor proposed would actually fund the execution of a pipeline of those projects over the next 5 to 7 years. There have been a lot of good suggestions from our legislative colleagues in recent weeks about ways to tweak and adjust the governor's budget proposal to improve its effectiveness. And I'm really quite confident that the legislature and the governor are really well aligned, one, on creating this quantum leap of investment in wildfire resilience, and then really building on this regionalized approach to fund those concentric circles of wildfire resilience. It's necessary. Fully a quarter of our state, over 10 million, 11 million Californians live in high fire severity zones, the so-called wildland urban interface. And we need to do more to protect these communities on a proactive, upfront basis, which is really where the wildfire resilience efforts come in. Moving forward, we are focused on reshaping that forest management task force that developed those recommended actions into an action plan, and to really reshape the task force to be all about the implementation of very specific measurable actions to build wildfire resilience. And we'll continue to adaptively manage how we spend these resources, our priorities, based on our growing scientific understanding. Now, we are just ending our second consecutive dry winter. And you no doubt have heard about this, which will exacerbate most likely our wildfire season. Our wildfire season, as conditions have changed and temperatures have increased, has grown in length, approximately anywhere from 60 to 90 days longer in terms of the most severe wildfire season. And at times this winter, given dry conditions, we were actually experiencing wildfires throughout the winter. So we have a real challenge in California. We know our climate is changing. We know we have to make up for decades of fire exclusion. The good news is we have leadership in Sacramento between our legislators and Governor Newsom that are foursquare committed to not only building our response capacity to these wildfires that we know are coming, but building our upfront proactive resilience efforts to ensure or to work toward ensuring that these wildfires, when they do happen, are limited in size and severity. So I'm really glad to be sharing this approach with you, and look forward to partnering with the panelists and really leaders from across Southern California, and in fact, all California, to really ensure that California continues to lead on building our climate resilience, and specifically in this topic of wildfires. Thanks so much for letting me share my perspective.
All right, thanks to Secretary Crowfoot. Secretary Crowfoot was planning to be here, but again, was called away at the last minute to be at that press conference in Fresno, which is happening right now. We will definitely be covering that, so you can look for a story on our websites as soon as that press conference is over, or read about it in tomorrow's newspapers. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists, all of whom are here. I'm going to start with Dr. Michael Goldner. Dr. Goldner leads the Berkeley Fire Research Lab. Prior to his current role, Dr. Goldner was a faculty member in the Department of Fire Protection Engineering at the University of Maryland, College Park from 2012 to 2019. Dr. Goldner is broadly interested in fire science problems, utilizing experiments in combustion and fluid dynamics theory to solve problems related to fire spread, material flammability, and smoke transport. He's a member of the board of directors for the International Association of Wildland Fire, chair of the Research Advisory Board of the National Fire Protection Agency's Fire Protection Research Foundation. He serves as associate editor for the journal Fire Technology and serves on the boards of the Fire Safety Journal and the International Journal of Wildland Fire. He's a principal member of the NFPA technical committees on spaceports and wildland and rural fire protection, also a recipient of the Combustion Institute SUGI Early Career Research Award, the NSF Career Award, the Pro Early Career Award in Fire Safety Science, and the Fire Protection Research Foundation Medal. Very decorated and esteemed individual who we're happy to have with us. Also on our panel is Senator Anthony Portentino. Senator Portentino represents the 25th State Senate District, which stretches from the foothills of the San Gabriel, or along the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains from Tujunga to Upland. That's quite a distance there. Senator Portentino currently serves as chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. He's been in the State House since 2006. Prior to his current term in the Assembly or the Senate, he served in the State Assembly from 2006 to 2012, representing the 44th Assembly District. Prior to that, he spent 8 years on the La Cañada Flint Ridge City Council with 2 terms as mayor. In 2019, Senator Portentino was awarded the prestigious Ellis Island Award at a ceremony in the Historic Islands Great Hall. Senator Portentino is one of the authors of Senate Bill 45, the Wildfire Prevention, Safe Drinking Water, Drought Preparation, and Flood Protection Bond Act of 2020. This bill would allocate $5.5 billion for fire prevention and climate resiliency. And then lastly, we have Ms. Tracy Hernandez on our board. Ms. Hernandez is the founding chief executive officer of the Los Angeles County Business Federation, also known as BizFed. This nonprofit grassroots alliance of 180 top business networks counts among its more than 400,000 business members a diverse demographic, industry sector, and geographic array of large and small employers of over 3.5 million people in Southern California. They also have a Central California chapter, and Ms. Hernandez founded the BizFed Political Action Committee, which seeks to elect public officials with job-creating focus and ability. She's also president of Empower Group, a business advisory company specializing in startups or strategic transition, utilizing unlikely partnerships to achieve greater impact. Thank you, panelists, for being here. What we're going to do now is ask each one of our panelists a question. They'll take a few minutes to answer that, and then we have a few questions that we will ask the panel in general to speak to. If those of you in the audience have questions, there's a Q&A function that you should see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Feel free to enter your questions into that Q&A. We'll have someone monitoring that and then feeding the questions back to me so that I can ask them of the panelists after we finish with the questions that we have already prepared and we'll be moving into right now. So with that, Dr. Goldner, I'm going to direct the first question to you. As we just heard from Secretary Crowfoot, every year California's wildfire season seems to get longer and worse. This is also one of the questions that one of our readers sent to us prior to the panel. Can you talk a little bit about why it is that the wildfire seasons are getting worse and how it is that we've come to basically having a year-round fire season, and then what you expect that will look like in coming years?
Sure. And, you know, none of us have a crystal ball, but unfortunately, we see a really growing and troubling trend in the wildfire behavior and outcomes in the state of California. Obviously, California has been no stranger to wildfires. This is something that's naturally occurred on the landscape. But we've made a lot of changes over the years. And unfortunately, that's resulted in the way that fire interacts with the landscape and the ecology and us as people in the community that live here, and it has started to be sort of these devastating consequences. We can kind of boil this down to three main areas, and I want to premise with the fact that fire in the landscape, we know is not actually a bad thing. It's that we've changed from, Secretary Crowfoot said, the smaller fires, which were low severity, not as much smoke, and really, part of indigenous and natural practices. And it's changed to these very destructive fires, which are causing these mass smoke events, harming the wildland urban interface and people and the structures. And so climate change is sort of the elephant in the room when it comes to the driver. We know and we can feel and see over the past few decades that these severe wildfire conditions are increasing in duration and in severity. What I mean by that is the sort of Santa Ana wind-driven events in Southern California or Diablo winds in Northern California, they're happening more often. The long-term drought conditions, which has led to beetle kill and forest die-off, this has been occurring over longer durations than we've seen in the past. California is no stranger, and these things have been happening for millennia, but we are seeing an increase in this, and this is affecting the fire behavior and the way this is occurring. We've also modified the way we treat wildfires in the natural landscape. That term, fire exclusion, that Secretary Crowfoot used, is well known in the field, especially over the last 100 years. We've been taking fire off the landscape by putting it out. Indigenous burning practices, which sort of manage the land, have been removed, and natural ignition sources. A fire on a calm day isn't going to result in a sort of devastating impact on the community. Those fires have all been put out. So the only fires that are left burn on the most destructive possible days. And unfortunately, that's led to a huge fuel buildup that we're now feeling in these severe events. Finally, we're moving where we live. We're living in what was called this wildland urban interface. That's where our homes, our businesses, where people live is adjacent or sort of surrounded within forests, rangeland, shrubland, chaparral. There's so many different ecoregions across California, and we're living within there. Those regions have had fire since long before we were here, but unfortunately, we're experiencing it. Santa Rosa, California is a great example. The 1960s, the Hanley fire rolled through there, and there was some effects and some homes lost. But compared to the Tubbs fire that happened just a couple of years ago, we can see an incredible change in scale. We're not seeing 10,000 homes burned in the past, but we're seeing that now. People live there. They're sources of ignition, but they're also being harmed by it. And so in the coming years, unfortunately, we don't see anything getting better, and we see the potential for things getting worse. Just like hurricanes or anything else, we can't predict exactly what's going to happen in the future. But what we do know and what we do see is that these conditions are growing and that we need to be prepared for this and take actions. Again, I love the way Secretary Crowfoot put it. It's wildfire resilience, or we work for the wildland urban interface as well as our forests and landscapes. So both of these together, we have to treat our landscapes and treat our communities so that our communities won't burn and we can safely live within the natural environment.
Thank you, Dr. Goldner. Senator Portentino, you are one of the co-authors of SB 45, which is a bond measure that would spend more than $4 billion to, among other things, prevent wildfires. Can you talk a little bit about that bond measure, what it would fund, how it would help prevent wildfires, and in a larger context, address climate change?
Absolutely. Thanks, Frank. And I'm glad to see everybody here today. It's good to see Tracy. We're partnering on some housing legislation as well. So you got a great panel. And Dr. Goldner, I don't know you, but nice to meet you virtually. Happy to be here. Before I talk about SB 45, it was great to have Secretary Crowfoot here to talk about the announcement today. And if I could give a little bit of specifics about what they just unveiled, which will be, for those of you who are interested, there'll be a budget hearing on Monday to go over the particulars. But it's basically in three categories: resilient wildlands, wildfire fuel breaks, community hardening, science-based management, and forest sector economic stimulus. And it comes to a total of $536 million is going to be expedited in what we're calling during the pandemic early action items. Typically during the legislative cycle, we do everything in the budget to meet the constitutional deadline in June, but because of the pandemic and the urgency of getting schools reopened and other things that the legislature and the governor felt needed immediate action, we're doing these early action items. And so next week, we're going to pass this $536 million fire resiliency effort. And Secretary Crowfoot is right. The legislature, the Senate leadership, and the governor have been working very, very well together on this plan. And it's exciting that it came together today, fortuitous that we're talking about it at the same time we're talking about climate change. So that's a little bit of what's happening. CAL FIRE is going to get a significant amount of resources. Again, something the Secretary talked about, the regional approach to this effort. The conservancies are getting $12 million each to fight this on a regional level, though. Sierra Nevada, which everybody knows needs more, is getting $20 million. So that'll all be discussed on Monday at the Senate Budget Committee. So stay tuned for that. In particular, SB 45, which I'm proud to join a number of Senate colleagues. Last year, Senator Ben Allen was the lead author. He's a co-author this year, or joint author. I'm listed first, but it really is a collection of senators that are doing this. Is $5.5 billion water, drought, and fire prevention, wildlife safe drinking water general obligation bond. We're hoping to get it on the ballot so the voters have an opportunity to vote on it. According to the California Fourth Climate Assessment prepared by Mr. Crowfoot's agency, California really needs to spend about $100 billion a year to meet the demand. The other interesting thing is if we don't start chipping away at it, it's just going to get more and more expensive. And so that's why this $5.5 billion is critical. Obviously, I'd love it to be bigger, but we also want to make sure it fits into the budget, the overall budget architecture. We don't want to, because of our prudence in the past, we've been well positioned to deal with the pandemic. We don't want to lose that ability. So right now it stands at $5.5 billion. Specifically, for Los Angeles metro area, the bond allocates $170 million for the conservancies. Again, that local angle of empowering those who know the communities best to deal with these issues. There's $170 million for the Rivers and Mountains Conservancy, $140 million for the RMC, SMMC for LA River revitalization and efforts around the river. There's another $40 million for urban greening, which is also important. Statewide, there's $170 million for more local grants to reduce wildfire risks. There's $650 million to reduce wildfires near communities, increase wildfire suppression. There's $225 million for forest health, because not only do we have to reduce the risks of wildfires, but we have to make sure that the forests are healthy going forward for all of the carbon sequestration and just the general health and welfare of our state. It makes sense to make sure that our forests are healthy. And we've heard a number of ways that happens. There's $700 million to increase coastal resilience. That's important too, because we cannot underestimate the threat of floods to our coastal areas as well. So there's $700 million to increase coastal resiliency and to mitigate the effects of sea level rise, which is also another byproduct of global warming. There's $30 million for the California Conservation Corps and other allocations around the state to mitigate all of these very, very important issues. So I'm hoping it passes. I'm hoping it works in concert with this early budget action. The other thing that the Secretary Crowfoot talked about is this action we're going to do next week is just part one. The budget that we finalize for June will have even more resources and even more targeted. But we wanted to get this out as quickly as possible to start addressing some of the urgent needs, because as Dr. Goldner and others have said, fire season's all year round. It's no longer, you can bring the super scoopers in from Canada for a certain number of months and feel protected. That's not the case anymore. This is a 12-month problem, and we need as much urgent solutions out the door, shovel-ready projects and ready to go, and forest health as possible. So that's a little bit about SB 45, which I'm proud to be supportive of.
Thank you, Senator. Now turning to Ms. Hernandez. Ms. Hernandez, as the CEO of BizFed, you have plenty of interaction with the business community. how can we address these issues? And we're talking about some pretty big budget dollars here. How can we address these issues and balance that with the needs of the business community and the economic stability of the state?
Excellent question, Frank. I'm glad you're pulling us all together to chat this through. It is complex, and balance, common sense, and patience always needed here. One thing you mentioned at BizFed, and you talk about the diverse business community, literally with 455,000 different and distinct companies and employers. You might imagine we get a lot of input on these issues, dealing with climate and fire mitigation, safety, you know, drought, earthquakes, all the things that we face here, to our sustainability, our competitiveness, our community, and our family safety is important. One thing on this topic too is it's super personal to me. My daughter moved to Paradise to go to school and was running for her life and during that fire, and thankfully she and her immediate family up there survived it and got out, but much loss for that. So I experienced that live. My son's a firefighter presently, and we bought a home, and the day after we moved in, the drum fire had to evacuate. So literally the movers dropped everything off, and then the marshals knocked on our door, and we left hours later. So personally, fire safety, fire mitigation, learning to live with this in a better way in California is super important. One thing I'd like to point out, but a lot of Californians don't realize this, that our built environment in our state only occupies 6% of all our land mass. It is our built environment, where all our homes are, where all our jobs are, where all the schools are, our houses of worship, only occupy 6% of our land. So dealing with fire safety and mitigation and economic decisions, you have to keep that in mind on what we're balancing and where we're choosing. And the other part of that is, obviously we're in business, so we're creating all the new science and technology and materials to be at the forefront of building better, building safer, building with the latest technology and science so that we can survive all these events that may happen or will happen. And that's one thing we have to take into consideration too, is that new construction, new buildings, so if it's homes or businesses or schools, house of worship, are withstanding the fires. And in fact, you mentioned Santa Rosa, we mentioned Ventura, all these fires. The newest in the last 5 years, the housing subdivisions that were built did not burn because they use different materials, they use different fire safety parameters, and even the materials and the runoff and all those items. And so literally they didn't burn, the newest subdivisions built in the newest buildings. So in California though, it's interesting because residents and regulators and lawmakers really seem to be averse to new building. Let's build some new housing. We need new jobs, and we need manufacturing facilities and new schools. Yet it's one of the hardest things we can get done in California. But I would propose we need to reshape that thinking. We need to embrace new home building to tackle our homeless and our housing crisis, just for our own people, our own workers, our own family members to be able to live, but also to fight the fire safety issue. And so those are a couple of things that I would just pose for current thinking among a laundry list, but Dr. Goldner and Senator Portentino and Secretary Crowfoot really brought a lot of other issues to the forefront that require a lot of balance and conversation, investment, along with being practical on the things I mentioned, just to pay attention to. It's not all about just going back. We have to go forward, and we have to be able to embrace the things that we know work.
Thank you, Ms. Hernandez. So California is a very large state with a lot of different geography. To Ms. Hernandez's point, our development tends to be clustered in highly urbanized areas, and we have vast undeveloped lands. What are the unique challenges that California faces as it relates to climate change? And let's start with Dr. Goldner.
Sure. You know, thank you for your comments, Tracy. That was a great way to lead in, because California is a diverse state. The people that we have, the many, biomes that we have chaparral in the south, and there's a lot of debate about how to manage those lands. We talked about, Tahoe and the Sierra region, tall forests. There's different ways we need to manage these areas, and different housing densities, everything else. We have, majority of the housing stock, the majority of the structures are already built. And so you're absolutely right that many of the new communities that are built actually have not been burning down as often. They've survived pretty well. And I think that goes not just from the way that structures are built, but the way communities are arranged and the way they're maintained. The newer structures, will that last? We don't know. But I think there's a lot of questions that point to opportunities there. And so I think there are some unique challenges with climate change, because we have so many different areas that are going to require some local approaches. But we also have opportunities. And, the opportunities really are in the local area where we look at the wildland urban interface. I think that there are opportunities to give incentives, get community programs going, so that we can try to maintain communities that are what we call hardened. So they have defensible space, they have the right materials on the outside. And sometimes it's the small things, and we can put those small things together so that the whole community is defensible. One of the biggest challenges is that, the way we looked at the forest fire problem decades ago was it's a single house in the forest, and, the cabin in the forest. That's not what we have. We have communities of homes together. And so if one structure ignites and burns, and there's no firefighting force there to do anything about it, that structure can then lead to other structures burning down next to it. And so it's a domino effect. So whatever we do can't focus just on a single structure, but we have to look at all the homes around and a community effect working together. And this requires great coordination. We know we also have an insurance crisis, at least in terms of wildfire in the state. And I think that's also an opportunity, because we may have the opportunity to try to create incentives, to try to push to do more mitigation measures that are going to make, communities not only safer to live, but hopefully decrease insurance costs and other barriers that are really coming up right now. So I think that science is I'll answer another question, really be able to contribute and to make some informed decisions. I think we know what works, but we don't know how well one thing works versus another. And we'd like to have those questions to do this in the best way possible.
Senator Portentino, anything to add?
Yeah, I think one of the things, the question is, what are the unique challenges? I mean, the sheer size of California, the diversity of California. I mean, when you have 4.2 million acres burn in 4 years, that just emphasizes how big our state is. We have unique, the state has coastline from, from Canada to Mexico. We have $575 billion worth of buildings susceptible to flooding. That's a staggering amount of potential danger. Think of the 134 people recently were killed in fires. 44,000 structures were damaged. And then the impact of all of that on air pollution and how that contributes to greenhouse gases and how that reduces the snowpack and that impacts our water supply and refueling the aquifilters. The size, the interrelation, and the challenges and the recent damages, I think, are all unique to California. And that's why, it's on everybody's mind. And Frank, that's why it's great you're having this forum, and why we have to put our resources and our science and our technology ahead of the game, because if, every month we don't, we're facing to have one or more of these risks happen. And so I think those are what makes California unique.
Frank, I would add to Dr. Goldner and Senator Portentino on One, on Dr. Goldner talking about insurance and being, so obviously in business, we're very practical and pragmatic, and everything relates to competitiveness and affordability. So the insurance industry actually has responded recently, where now they're recognizing the Firewise US community, shelter in space, and then active fuel mitigation, including burns and vegetation thinning, as a way to get discounts on your insurance, on your buildings and on your homes. And so that's real world, you can touch and feel it. You can get a discount on your insurance policy by adding these items to your home or your development and your planning. So that's there and that's happening. So it's very pragmatic. And when we talk about the diversity around the state, and the senator is quite a leader in this space around regional decisions and local control, and everyone, having room to have say that it isn't a one size fits all. And the communities around the state or the regions, we have a BizFed in the Central Valley, very different than the BizFed in Los Angeles, and so on, with the different issues. The common issues, though, will come to play is government and the private sector can work together, where the private sector, we're developing all the latest technologies and systems for defensible space and for sprinkler systems and underground utilities, and all that's all us, right, doing that. So one, the government can help by kind of either incentivizing or just getting out of the way too, because there is a desire to meet these needs and to implement the best tools if we don't get stopped at every turn. Sometimes lawmakers with good intentions, not Senator Portentino, because he's always got the smart ideas going, but some of his colleagues every once in a while come up with some doozies where it's like put every roadblock in the way for us to implement the best new practices and life-saving ideas that are proven. Why not adopt those quickly and so build this year with those tools, and next year and so on, while we're working longer term on other goals.
Thank you, Ms. Hernandez. So I want to sneak a reader question in because I think it's a nice segue off of what you guys were just talking about, and I've seen them come in. This one's really good. This is from Lucy Dunn, who is the president of the Orange County Business Council. Lucy says, in last year's fire in Orange County, 90,000 residents were evacuated, yet because of good firefighting, good building standards, and the toll road as a separation, not a single home was lost. How do we meet the state's housing crisis when literally everything in California is deemed subject to wildfire risk? How do we balance competing interests? All new housing cannot be jammed into urban city centers. And let me send that one first to Senator Portentino, and then we'll go to Ms. Hernandez and then to Dr. Goldner.
Well, the housing crisis is, I mean, again, California is facing multiple issues. Housing is one of them. Homelessness is another. Fire is another. Environmental protection and greenhouse. It's all interrelated. Clearly, we need more housing production, and part of that is how we monetize land use in California. There's a disincentive to build housing. Cities are rewarded for chasing retail dollars, not building housing. And that's frankly the bill that Tracy and I are working on, is to create that economic incentive for cities to meet their housing goals. I think accountability on reaching housing goals is important too. We have some cities that are very, very progressive in their approach to affordable housing and building housing. And then we have cities that sue the state constantly and refuse to do anything. One of my biggest challenges and pet peeves in Sacramento is we shouldn't treat the good cities the same as the bad cities. Again, good and bad is a simple term, but there are cities that are just resilient or resistant to housing, and those cities should meet their responsibility, and we should reward the cities that don't. And so that's the key, and the balance between local control and Sacramento mandates has been out of balance because so many cities have resisted over. And again, I'm a former local government official, and I've been in meetings where you've had arguments between mayors of one city saying, hey, we're doing it, you're not, and the other cities are saying, well, that's tough because we're just not going to do it because we're built out. And so all sides bear responsibility in solving the problem, and we have to hit the sweet spot to make sure that all cities are taking this seriously and doing what they need to do according to the the new standards that have been brought out. But there's no question we need more production, and there's no question that there's enough blame to go around for all to frankly feel ashamed of themselves up to this point. And so, I'm promoting, taking some of our dormant retail space and incentivize, it's the BizFed idea, to repurpose dormant retail space into housing by providing the taxes that those spaces would generate if they were still stores. That's just one idea. Tying things to RENA and production, taking it away from being a theoretical number to actually saying you must meet it, not just plan for it, is also important. So we have to do all of these things.
Mr. Hernandez?
Yeah, Lucy Dunn at Orange County Business Council, obviously super talented, knowledgeable person in this space. And I think, Frank, one thing is to note where she gave you a tangible example of something that worked, right? A build plan included a freeway, included housing infrastructure, and I forget the third element of that, but you articulated, she gave it to us. And because of those three elements in the smart building, no lives were lost. And I think it's important for us to not just skim past that, but to recognize it. And then why wouldn't every single county, she's referencing Orange County, but why wouldn't every single county in the state run to those solutions where she demonstrated that three different approaches to building in a community resulted in no lives lost? And I think that's just something we have to stop and hold on to. In fact, right before we jumped onto this call, I didn't get a chance to read it, but I saw a news piece just break around Tejon Ranch, which is a master plan community in northern LA County, 15 years in the making, including, really great zero technology, defensible space, use of parks, underground utilities, open areas. I mean, some of the best, smartest, fire mitigated, the fire department's helping them, got approved after 15 years and many hurdles and a lot of lawsuits. And I just read someone just stopped it. I don't know, I got to look into it. And it's like, this is what we do to ourselves in California. Like, why would we stop? That will solve the housing needs for the people that work in that region, northern LA County and southern Kern County. It was the smartest fire prevention, latest technology approved, and now someone's stopping it. Those are the things we have to just pay attention to. Lucy just reminds me too, but hearing from her that there's a couple of bills. I think it's SB 12, McGuire, and then Senator Stern has a couple, 592 and 55. I think we all need to take a look at those as being, they're not cooked yet. They're quite a bit of overreach, all three of those, that will completely stop all home building in the state. So those are things we'll go back, we'll help people understand and look at them. I'll just plant a seed, because Frank, you're talking about a lot of things that are live breaking news and information. These are fairly new as well. And we need to just not let people get a flying pass on, seems like a good idea, maybe it will solve a problem, but in the meantime create 12 other problems on life and death situations we have. So I'll pass it to Dr. Goldner. I get going on my high horse sometimes, and it's like we gotta just rattle some pages, get people to listen.
Okay, Dr. Goldner?
Yeah, well, I like to rattle everyone's cages in the academic community, and I'm always yelling wooey, 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 which is the Wildland urban interface, because I think this is where, the rubber meets the road, where we can make a huge impact on some of these devastating events and the effects that we're seeing. The Orange County fire was in a new community. It really would have depended on the weather and what happened. If there were 10 fires started at the same time, the outcome may have been different. But in that case, because there was good defensible space and current building practices, that community survived. And it's all about increasing the chances. The academic and the research community, also with funding from insurance, they work on natural hazards of all types, from earthquakes to hurricanes, and the federal government gets involved. Look at Wildland Urban Interface. The National Institute for Standards and Technology, I just recently moved from Maryland. Out there, they're working on WUI, but they have a handful of people on that staff. And that's for this enormous problem. And so I think that there's a huge opportunity. And because our state is so affected, it's important for them to get involved in not just trying to push every solution, but to find the best solutions and bring academics and industry and government together to work this out. There are some great questions that have been brought up. For instance, should we build in wildland urban interface areas? Is that going to be safer? If we build to certain standards, is that going to be, will that new community serve almost as a fire break? Potentially. But I think we need to do a little bit of homework and make sure that the measures that we're applying are the best. And I'm not sure if the full cycle of the experts, reviewing these plans and everything is in place. In other words, where are the guidelines for saying, okay, if you want to build in this area, communities really need to go above and beyond to this. So I agree. I don't think it's a good practice to have this development and then have it pulled back and then have it move forward and have it pulled back. It would be great to work collaboratively into finding the practices of what we want to do. California is a leader in the fact that they have California Building Code Chapter 7A. And so that's great. It provides the recommendations for things like vent screens and what lumber to use and certain things like that on the building construction. But it's also not universally applied. If you're in a state jurisdiction zone versus a local jurisdiction, it may not be applied. And some areas that have burned down won't require then fire safety hazards for new construction when they're rebuilt after a fire. So there's a lot of these little fixes that need to happen. And I think the coordination and collaboration into finding sort of these optimized solutions. You mentioned sprinklers as well. There's very little, if any, evidence showing how sprinklers should be best applied or if they would work on the exterior of a structure. It's not that they wouldn't, but we haven't really done that work. And there's companies providing some solutions I think that we need to put together. And there's definitely been discussions about work happening. But this would allow us to understand how important those effects are and to implement them well. And hopefully that would remove barriers to folks, doing development in the safest and most efficient way.
Okay, so I'm gonna insert here another reader question as it is on point to what Dr. Goldner was just talking about, and so I'll direct this first to you, Dr. Goldner. Several of the readers have asked similar questions, which basically go to why not just restrict buildings in what you refer to as the WUI zone, and that also, of course, has an implication on the housing crisis. So, Dr. Goldner, thoughts on restricting the building of homes in that area? The interface
well, I'll
zones?
start with the fact that almost all the ecoregions in California burn, and there's something called embers or firebrands, so little pieces of the plants or structures burning, and they come off, and those little sparks fly. They can fly 2 miles and start new fires. And when they land near or on structures, they can ignite fires. Most of them won't, but there's millions. They call it like blizzards or ember storms. And so we understand that they're responsible for most ignitions in a wildland urban interface. Think of every area that's undeveloped or natural lands, extend 2 miles or more out. You're covering the majority of the state. So I think that there is an issue here, because if you look at all areas that have any fire risk, that's going to cover most of the undeveloped land. And so that is a challenge that California has. Now, I think for solutions, there is a strong debate, because we do see, or the literature shows, that denser development is less likely to have large losses. But it would also say that if there was a bad fire in a denser development, it is more likely that it would then spread from structure to structure. So there's some interesting trade-offs in that decision. Whereas the sort of not as dense construction, it seems that there's been more losses there. So I think there's a lot more research and a lot more work that we need to do to find what are the best conditions there. I have a young family in California. We recently moved to the Bay Area during a crisis, and it's really hard to find housing. And I think that there's going to be some unmet need if we don't continue to build and expand. But we should just think of doing it, I think, safely and sustainably. And we need to better define what our risk threshold is and figure out how to build within that. That means it may be more expensive to build certain structures that are going to be very, very defensible in certain areas. But I think that that's a very important key question that we need to get into, because we can't only do urban development from the best I can understand of available space in the state.
Ms. Hernandez, thoughts on that?
Well, just building on Dr. Goldner, we have the California Building Industry Association, very active in BizFed, and so they have about 3,000 home builders, and those 3,000 in the state build about 84% of our housing stock, everything that gets built and sold. So they have a pretty good sense on what's happening here in California, and there need to be a big part of our solution to tackle our homelessness problem, which is getting more housing, permanent supportive, affordable housing, workforce housing, which Senator Portentino is a huge champion of. Those people that are just out working and taking care of their families, they need to be able to afford to live here. And then of course, market rate housing for everyone else. And one thing that they talk about is that there is plenty of opportunity, place and space within the design built environment that our cities, but 500 cities in the state of California, they all really set the land use requirements. So they get, the kind of the feel and the community vibe and what they want their city to feel like, look like, interact, how do the parks and schools and just movability of people. So as they're making those decisions, those that need to build housing for all Californians who want to live here to have a place, and for Dr. Goldner to find a good place for his family too, is they just say we have the ability to build, we know how to build, we know where to build, there's plenty of opportunity. It's just there's the costs that get layered on because so many people want to solve every problem with anytime a home's going to be built. You wouldn't believe, last time we did an analysis, there's like 28 different fees that are layered on to build a home anywhere in California to mitigate all kinds of other problems that have nothing to do with the housing and the safety of housing situation. They're solving other people's problems, other parts of our societal problems. And so yet now we wonder why we can't house all of our Californians. We have the highest homeless rate crisis in the nation, and LA is the epicenter of that. And that is life and death. We're talking about wildfire, life and death. We have people 365 days a year living on the street in the highest numbers in the nation. And so we've got to I'll come back to when I opened with balance is key, and moving forward to saying yes to things while we're making things perfect in the end scenario is critical. And so I guess that's what I would offer is we can do it. People know how, we have the place, the space, and the wherewithal. So those that, I don't know why everyone wants to stop every good project from going on, but there's certainly a lot of folks that are in California that just don't want anyone else to have anything else. And I think as a society in this equity dialogue that we're in right now, we have to just stop that. Like, talk about equity, and what we're solving is we have to change the way we do things. And saying yes to more is a part of what we have to do here to get people housed.
Frank, if I could jump in real quick,
Absolutely.
I think, yeah, definitely we need more, but we need it to be the right more. For years we've talked about expanding light rail, getting people out of their cars, having transit corridors. There's a place for density in suburban communities as we expand light rail, and there's an opportunity to do sustainable communities around that light rail, and have much more, higher builder, more dense projects. A lot of those are driven by the local governments. A lot of those traditionally were driven by redevelopment funding. Of course, the state did away with redevelopment funding. so we have to, from a state perspective, we have to invest into that smart planning. And it's fine to put strings attached, that it could be workforce housing, environmental regulation, and then we have to work in concert with the local governments to make it happen. But what I see is there's this battle on housing production between, believe it or not, between Ronald Reagan and FDR. You know, there are those people who want the government to play a more active role and step up and fund it and work collaboratively in more of an FDR model. And then there are people who say, you know, let's just do away with all local regulations and all control and streamline everything and make everything administrative, and empower more market rate housing and let it trickle down to be affordable housing. You know, and so it staggers my mind that we've got this battle between Reagan and FDR. And frankly, what we need to use is sort of the threat of Reagan to empower FDR to get it done, versus focusing so much on market rate rental housing as the panacea of our housing crisis. I was on a housing panel, believe it or not, with high school seniors from San Bernardino County 2 weeks ago. And these high school seniors, who are largely first generation Californians, did a presentation on how much they wanted to be homeowners versus home renters for the health and welfare and the safety and the future upward mobility of their family. And I said to myself, my God, these high school seniors are so bright and talented that they get it. And then I was on another panel with, you know, more traditional housing folks who were saying, well, the days of home ownership are over. And it was like, no, that's an urban, you know, yuppie perspective on things, not a real California, you know, everyday people perspective. And we can't let that battle between market rate housing not help those folks who are here who want a piece of that, you know, American dream. And if you think about, why do we have the San Gabriel Valley? You know, people left the city to get that small first home. Why do we have Long Island? You know, because people left Brooklyn and the Bronx. You know, immigrant communities, you know, created that slice, and we have to recognize that, and we can't just abandon the role of the government in funding and incentivizing affordable housing and just let the market and a Reagan approach dictate the solution.
Frank, can I agree with the senator real quick? It is definitely all the above. It is definitely, when we took $2 billion a year out of the California effort to build affordable housing and give motivation to the cities to build it, you can't pretend like that's not going to matter. You know, I know you weren't a big proponent of that. I'm not putting that at your feet. Obviously, Governor Brown, that was his idea.
I have the battle scars to prove that. I said, you can't do away with it without having a substitute.
Right. And yet we're still working on that. I know you're still working on it. I appreciate you not giving up the gauntlet, but it's like, we have to do it all. We have to build the urban transit-oriented housing. We need to build the suburban affordable housing. We need to just get at it. We're hundreds of thousands a unit short every year in California. And that is a human crisis. We have the wherewithal to fix these problems. And so let's keep fighting. And Frank, you keep writing about it, and we'll hold people accountable.
We have written plenty of stories, and we will write plenty more. I think that the affordable housing crisis is well documented, and it is a critical part of this conversation, affordable housing and access to housing. And there is a tension between, obviously, what we're talking about here, some of the questions that have come in regarding like where you should be able to build or where you shouldn't be able to build, and the land that's available to build on, and the prices that of homes related to, you know, the cost of developing the homes in the first place. All of those things are inextricably linked and present, I mean, collectively a huge challenge to the state, both in terms of fire prevention, but also in terms of affordable housing. If any of you have more thoughts on that, I'm happy to have them, or we'll move on to the next question.
I'm going
All
to
right.
jump in. I'm going to jump in. We have one of the BizFed members is a nonprofit affordable housing builder, and one of the biggest ones in Southern California. So he gave me this information. National Core, the CEO, Steve Puntel. And so this is real nuts and bolts stuff, right? So this is nonprofit affordable housing. This isn't market rate. It's not for millionaires. Okay. And so on average, he says, so not land. So land is different everywhere, depending on where you're building, but just the cost of the house. On average, so whether you're in, Diamond Bar or Long Beach, it's about $350,000 nuts and bolts, to build the structure on an affordable housing unit size. And he said he breaks it down and it comes up to a crazy amount. It's almost 1/3 of that. So it's like 110,000 of that 350 on average is just the cost of navigating the process. So that's not anything on building. It's not a window. That's not flooring. That's not HVAC. That's just getting through the process. So it's time to navigate, City Hall, and paying lobbyists and, all the staff you need just to get through a permitting process. And so that would be one way we could quickly get the affordability in is expedite, which Senator Portentino was talking about. There's ways to expedite good planning within already established city zoning and good strategic planning, to remove 1/3 of the cost to build an average affordable housing unit by just saying yes and not requiring time and hurdles and lawsuits to get it done.
Other thoughts on housing?
I'll just add that, we should continue to make sure, anything that we build is going to be safe. And the risks are changing. The wildfire risks are changing, and in some areas, flood and sea level rise because of climate change. But I think, in terms of wildfire, we can mitigate a lot of these risks, but we have to do the homework and we have to put it together. And I think there's dual roles of whoever's developing and people who already live there, as well as in government, and not only enforcing, but helping to just give the tools of how to do it or give those incentives. And so I think we can do that in many areas, maybe not all of them. Some areas are hard to evacuate. We have to consider this, but I think we just have to keep that in the height of our mind. We're not willing to remove sprinklers and smoke detectors when building a structure because, that's become accepted because we know that saves lives. It saves property too. And we need to have, I think, that same thought process when we build in the wildland urban interface and start standardizing and really also, keep up the development and the R&D, which is a collaboration between academia and national labs and industry, and keep that going to keep pushing it so that we can try to make it safer and maybe cheaper and easier to make it just as safe.
Frank, real quick, if I could jump in, there is an element in SB 45 to actually provide funding for some of the academic research that our public institutions are doing. So it's not, it's proportional, but it's, everything we spend on research, helps as well.
Thank you. So we have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to move into some more reader questions. This next one, I'm actually going to pick up 2 or 3 of them and kind of fuse them together. And I'm going to look to you, Dr. Goldner, to answer first, since I think the question goes more specifically to your areas of expertise. And then to Senator Portentino, and then back to Ms. Hernandez. So readers are asking, what about the practice of controlled burns used to prevent dangerous tree density? One viewer asked about forest thinning, cutting trees down to prevent fires, and another asked whether or not, I think after the senator mentioned the super scoopers from Canada, whether we could buy our own and have them on standby when we were doing these controlled burns. So first to you, Dr. Goldner, thoughts on those questions?
Yeah, I'll take it one by one. So first about prescribed fires. I mean, we talked about fire exclusion. We took fire off the landscape. I like to tell my students who take a wildfire course, we think of fuel loads in a building, your couch, your desk, these things could light on fire and add to the fire in the house. Outside, they grow every day. There's photosynthesis, there's rain, and they're going to keep building until you take it off. And there's lots of different fuel management practices. Some involve logging, some involve mastication, which could be like goats on hillsides, and prescribed fires. And so it is a local and an ecosystem dependent approach. It's not my main expertise. I work more in the WUI. However, there's a huge body of literature. And there's even, for instance, the UC Cooperative Extension, which has local specialists in each county who can help and know the local ecosystem and know the rules. And so we are really deficient on the amount of prescribed fire that we need. It's not enough on the landscape. Some areas have had so much buildup that there may need to be some manual sort of, tree thinning or other things, but it depends on the area. So I think all approaches are going to be important. Right next to some communities, we might want goat grazing and different things, but this is a local approach. We have some of that knowledge and tools, but there isn't enough support. Added to that, it kind of takes specialists to do that. And so we need to add to some of the academic programs. I know CAL FIRE is working on recruiting programs for firefighters, and hopefully some of them will work on this year round because they really need training to be a burn boss and to do these things safely. Regarding suppression, when we talk about aerial suppression, the cost of suppression versus mitigation is in its other scales. The amount of bang for your buck in terms of just annual maintenance versus buying new helicopters and airplanes is a monumental difference. I'm not saying we don't need some. Aerial suppression has been shown in some studies for very early attack to be very effective. But after that early attack, its effectiveness diminishes, especially in the head of a fire. So on the worst fire days, they'll try, but it's hard to gauge how much effectiveness we have. It's just unfortunately extreme fire behavior with so much spotting. But California has invested actually a lot in helicopters in particular. And so there's multiple benefits there, and the fact that there's also observational knowledge, so they get some incident knowledge about what's happening. It's kind of versatile. And I think it's more aimed at early attack or for like a point. So if they're at a specific structure. And so there's some benefits there. But I think looking at the very large suppression sort of, you imagine the 747, there's more limited cases there. We're not going to get out of this crisis by adding more aerial suppression. Even if you added everything you could think and you quadruple the size, it's not going to make a big dent. The big dent is going to come on the ground before the fire starts.
And I can, that when I ask those questions, that's the answer I get from CAL FIRE and others. Just where it's the most efficient use of dollars. I guess for every dollar we spend in prevention, we get a $7 benefit. And the strategic use of the helicopters are able to get into areas that the big super scoopers aren't. The sheer cost of the super scoopers, it's just enormous. But again, when we have a fire, everybody focuses on them. That's where the news cameras go to the super scoopers. And so they've made them the rock stars of the firefighting when they are a tool for the early stages of it. But because they're so impressive, everybody likes to focus on them. And so there's lots we can do, as the doctor pointed out. I will say, when I was mayor of La Cañada, we worked with LA County and did prescribed burns all around the city. And then we did use the goats as well in the areas where we couldn't do. We had tons of goats doing mitigation. Now, on the other side, after you do the burns, you have to make sure that native plants, that you invest in the native plants versus getting the non-natives that come in, the mustard that takes over. So there's a delicate balance on the ecosystem that you have to balance the prescribed burns with. And oftentimes that's where, environmental focus isn't. We don't put enough money or resources into the aftermath of the prescribed burn, which creates some of the controversy. So if we do it with the right plan and the right back end, it's certainly an effective tool necessary. The other piece of it is, as we make our forests healthy and we do the thinning, we have to have a use for the dead trees that we pull out, you know, if we can turn that into, you know, a productive use as well. And there are companies out there that have a very good way of doing that that helps create more energy. And so, you know, one of the challenges we have in California is we do phase one well, because everybody gets excited, and it's phase 2 and 3 that we don't do as well as, you know, as we should, because again, the cameras are on phase 1. The cameras aren't on the guy who plants or the woman who plants the tree. They're only there on the person who crushes the tree, because it's much more dramatic when we crush it. And so we just have to make sure that we do the less jazzy things, but just as important for the overall health and welfare of the state with the same zeal.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I am super grateful for the aerial suppression, having, like I gave you my personal survival of fires, and those guys who come in and drop the red, I don't know all the technical terms, but they fly in and there's a lot of red stuff that comes down and boom, they stop the fire. And I mean, literally I can see it from my house. It saved my neighbors and myself. So I'm grateful. I like those rock stars. They're amazing people and they're saving lives. And I know you do too, Senator. But I wanted to add in on the forest thinning, because you started mentioning that and that being important. I had an opportunity. I was invited up to Big Creek. SoCal Edison has their hydroelectric plant up in Big Creek, and then by, because they've had that facility and that property for, I don't know, hundreds of years. So they do forest management on a part of it. And then right across the way, you can see where the feds do forest management. So part of it's federal forest and part of it's Big Creek, or private forest, I guess is what you would call it with Edison. And wow, it was like the biggest eye-opening experience. If you guys haven't been there, you should do it. It was like amazing to see the health of the trees that Edison manages at Big Creek, how they're healthy. You know, there's air, there's light between them, the brush that grows low, the trees that grow high. And the ecosystem is just, you can see the strength of it. And right across the way, you can see, because of the federal rules and regulations that either have applied or still apply, the forest is almost dead. It is so thick, they wouldn't let them thin at all. And it's so thick, you can't see much health at all in the trees. So much, you can just see brown, dead forest. And so it's eye-opening to see one side to the other side, one kind of forest management thinning, and the other side of not doing it, cause and effect. And of course, then a huge part of it was burned in the fires. I mean, it lit up just like Kindle because it was super dry, where on the other side of the ravine, it didn't burn. I mean, it's day and night. So I'd encourage everyone to take a look at that. Dr. Goldner, you're shaking your head. Maybe you can add a little more scientific analysis behind what I saw personally, and just, you know, we should take a page out of their playbook and apply it across the state.
Yeah, and I'd add real quick. So, I mean, there's a lot of studies, and it depends on the type of forest and ecosystem you're in, and there's different experts in different areas. But, you know, one thing that's important is, you know, thinning sometimes is part of the way of getting back to sort of where there was less fuel. But there's also the huge problem of litter on the ground. And so prescribed fire is usually a part of that. And I'm pretty sure I've heard that PG&E has used prescribed fire on their lands up there. And so it's not, you know, so some of that logging and sort of things can be part of that. And it may be part to bring it back to a more natural, or whatever the new state is. But the fire is also very important to clear up that brush and that litter on the ground, which is going to sort of light up the fuels that can spread to the treetops. And so there's a lot of expertise, and I think we need to grow that expertise, particularly in, you know, like burn bosses and these programs. They're trying to get more people with the expertise. So we can't just throw money immediately at the problem too. We want people with the expertise to do this safely, and they exist, but I think we need to get more students and get more people studying this and out in the field. And hopefully with all this new attention, that's going to happen, and it's going to decrease risks to our communities as well.
Thank you, Dr. Goldner. Well, we are right at time for the panel. So let me thank the three of you for taking time to be with us today. Excellent thoughts and comments by all of you. Really, really, really appreciate your expertise and your presence here today. And with that, I am going to turn back over to my partner and co-host, Mr. Ramakrishnan.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank you, Frank. That was a very stimulating, and you know, there's so many dimensions here, and there are trade-offs. There are important multiple dimensions to consider. I must say that I didn't expect this to be as fully fleshed out as of a conversation as we had today. So thank you for that. And thank you, Frank, Senator Portentino, Michael, and Tracy for really in producing such an engaging and informative conversation, and something that, you know, hopefully we can still do something with some of the insights gained here as we approach the next fire season, if not for the longer term. I'll just say to conclude, this issue of climate change and what we can do as solutions is not limited to the conversation we're having here today. So for SoCal Policy Forum, the next event that we're going to have is to look at the possibility of Southern California being not only a national, but a global innovator when it comes to green jobs and green technology. If we look, we haven't talked that much about air pollution outside of, you know, these kind of course, whenever you have forest fires, you know, the greenhouse gas implications of the air pollution is enormous, but there's so much that we produce every year. The pandemic gave a little bit of a respite, but we're really taking off again in terms of the significant implications for the Southern California region. So we're hoping to organize an event sometime in the next 2 months with a vision of green technology as part of Southern California's innovation brand, just as we have Silicon Valley with its high tech and social media tech, and then biotech down in San Diego. There's a lot that's already happening from the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator all the way over to the Salton Sea, where there's talk of lithium extraction and what that could mean in terms of battery production in the United States to service the needs of electrification of our transportation system. So look forward to continuing the conversation with that as our next topic. And thank you everyone for joining us, and I'll kick it back to you, Frank.
All right. Again, thank you to all of you who came to watch today, and thanks to Senator Portentino, Dr. Goldner, and Ms. Hernandez for your expertise on our panel, and also to Secretary Crowfoot for recording his video. Too bad he could not be here today. All right. Thank you all. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll be in touch.
Take care, everybody. Be well.
Thank you.